Well, hello and welcome to the Rooted Together podcast, a podcast which aims to root you in Christ through His Word together. I'm your host, Charles, and today we are in Genesis chapter 5, and we're talking about genealogies. I know that's not everybody's favorite topic when you think about the Bible. In fact, most people avoid genealogies entirely. And I get it, because what do you think about when you think about genealogies? Well, you think about monotony, you think about just a list of names, and sometimes it is just a list of names, but always for a theological purpose. And here in Genesis chapter 5, we have this break in the story. We have this unfolding story of God and creation, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. Cain's line, it's disastrous because Cain's line is leading nowhere good. And then we have at the end of chapter 4 this new start with the line of Seth. And we might be wondering, just as ancient Israel was wondering, where is God going with this? Well, here the genealogy is more about theology. And I think I said that in the last episode, but it's very true in this episode. And we really have these two little off-ramps as you read through this genealogy. Now, you're going to notice some things like 962 years old and all these weird ages. And there's a lot of debate as to what exactly those mean, but we don't want to get lost in the minute details because there's nuance and there's some cultural background and lingual background that needs to be done in that. And some of it is just unknown, or people just lived a really long time, or the numbers were funny. We don't really know. Not that any of it takes away from the credit of the Bible. We know that it is credible because this is however Moses got these numbers, that's what he's got, and he's telling you. But again, the point of this genealogy isn't to give you a history lesson. It isn't to tell you that people lived a really long time. The ages really don't matter here. What's important is the message that's being told. You have this new line, and as you see, it gets to verse 22, and it says this, and after he fathered Enoch, when Enoch was 65 years old, he fathered Methuselah. And after he fathered Methuselah, Enoch walked with God for 300 years and fathered other sons and daughters. So Enoch's life was 365 years. Enoch walked with God. That's repeated twice now in those few verses. Then he was not there because God took him. And we kind of read that as a little odd sometimes, but this is a break in the action. What's happening here is there is finally someone in the line of Seth, because Cain's line is very corrupt, and in the line of Seth, you have someone who walks with God so much so that God takes him up into heaven. And that is showing, one, to God's people, Israel, as they wait to enter the promised land, that they can walk with him, and two, that God longs for them to walk with him. There is a promise of relationship and a desire for relationship, and Enoch shows that. Enoch exemplifies that. It shows Israel what can happen, that once again man can walk with God, at least in some way, because sin does cause separation. But here we have Enoch, holy as he is, God actually takes him up. And then you go through a few more names and you come to this second off-ramp. And it's this. We have Lamech. He was 182 years old when he fathered a son, and he named him Noah, saying that this one will bring us relief from the agonizing labor of our hands caused by the ground that the Lord has cursed. In that verse, you have a lot going on. First, we have a break again, and now we introduce a character who's going to take up the next couple of chapters, Noah, very famous Bible character. Why is that important? It's what Lamech says about Noah. This one. Well, that language should remind us of Genesis chapter 3, when God said, I will send someone, and he will come, and he will crush the head of the serpent. He will end the curse. And we have Lamech all those years later, a long time later, saying this is the one that's going to do it. He's that one that was promised to Adam and Eve. He will bring relief from the agonizing labor of our hands caused by the curse that the Lord cursed because of sin. Now, spoilers, Noah, while he saves people, while he saves the human line, the line of Seth, Noah doesn't end the curse. In fact, he's a very flawed person, and we'll see that in the coming chapters, that will he end the curse? And the answer is going to be no. In fact, if you start reading through Genesis and really reading through the rest of the Old Testament, you're going to see this longing for one who will come and who will end the curse. And you're going to have people saying, is this the one? Is that the one? Is this the one? Longing for the one, but the ones they choose always let them down because they are human. And in the end, they must realize, after 400 years of silence at the end of the Old Testament, that God must come to send the one, and that one is Jesus Christ. He would end the curse of sin and promise to come again and end all suffering and wipe away every tear from every eye that follows him. That is the hope that we have in the 21st century, that post the cross, that's the hope we have. But for those who are reading this, for Israel waiting on the edge of the promised land, that unsatisfactory hope of going, this isn't the one, that isn't the one. When is the one going to come? Longing for God to supply that person who would come and who would redeem the creation. And they would have to see, and what they would ultimately fail to see, is that only God can do that. Noah couldn't do that. Abraham couldn't do that. Moses couldn't do that. Jacob couldn't do that. A little out of order, but you get the point. None of them could bring about the redemption and the lifting of the curse, not even King David. And so we long for Christ because he alone will stomp on the serpent's head. He will be the one who will end the curse. He will be the one that will end and bring relief, not just from the work of our hands, but relief from sin and from death. And as you read chapter 5 in this genealogy, long for that. Long for Christ to lift the curse, not from hard labor, but from sin and from death, and from wiping away every tear from every eye. Well, I'd like to thank you for joining me in Genesis chapter 5, and I look forward to joining you in Genesis chapter 6 next time. I'll see you there.